Melee is just swing one stick or swing different stick, and in hard mode it turns into stick with gun, apparently. It's a very simple class, but today I think I've thought of some unusual strategies, hopefully that you can use against each of Terraria's bosses, except for Deerclops, that will range from the impractical or perhaps the new meta. And I feel I should mention that there are many strategies that I tried that I won't mention in this video either because they were either too ineffective or just not unique enough to include. We'll start out with the first boss of the game, King Slime, who I've brought over to the ocean to fight. For this strategy to work, all you really need are flippers. You might be thinking that I'm going to suggest fighting King Slime with the Trident, as this weapon gives you increased mobility in water. However, I found that the Trident doesn't have the reach it needs to be effective against King Slime's strange hitbox, and the added mobility was more of a hindrance than a support most of the time. What ended up being more effective is using flippers alongside the swordfish you can get from fishing in the ocean. The swordfish has one big advantage, that is its extra reach, allowing you to attack King Slime from a safe distance, and by using flippers you can maintain the advantage by being above the boss. Plus, you don't have to deal with the slimes hardly at all, as they'll float to the water surface and stay there. Let's take a look at this strategy that was more effective than I thought it would be. The slime spear was added almost certainly just because of Skyblock. However, it inflicts the slime debuff, which doubles the effects of fiery debuffs, and which when combined with the magma stone means you'll deal 30 damage per second with the debuff alone. Now the slime debuff only lasts for 3 seconds, so to get the most bang out of your buck, it's best to hit the eye at least once every 3 seconds, and even in master mode with a minimal build, that wasn't very difficult to do without taking much damage at all. The main advantage of this strategy is that it's very debuff reliant, meaning most of your damage is not coming from hitting the eye directly, so even without an arena, if the eye is hiding underground, you'll still be dealing consistent damage. And to add a little more debuff damage, I'd mix in the Ice Boomerang periodically with its 50% chance to inflict Frostburn. The Eater of Worlds leaves you several different options, and even in master mode can be quite simply face tanked. The first build was a bit over the top, requiring a rare tentacle spike, the Magma Stone, Sharktooth Necklace, a Bass Statue, and Gladiator Armor. However, you can do this with even less. Say you get the Ball of Hurts, which I feel is never difficult to get from Shadow Orbs, and then regular gold armor with none of those other items that you need to farm for. You can park yourself here by grappling to the ground and still do just fine. Yes, I do realize my character has 500 health, and it's my testing character and I forgot to undo that, but I still never fell below 250 health, meaning that I'd still be perfectly fine if I only had 400. The reason this strategy works, for those who might not know, is that most often you're taking damage from the body segments, whose physical damage is quite low. Only the heads deal significant damage, and since you're being hit constantly by the low damage body segments, you'll often have iframes keeping you safe from the head. Also, this build can utilize even less with just a Bandit regen, Ball of Hurt, gold armor, and hook combined with a campfire, heart lantern, iron skin, regeneration, and thorns potions. Even with just that, it still did the job. I also tested the flaming mace, light's bane, mandible blade, stylish scissors, and even the sawtooth shark, but none of them were capable of succeeding using the same strategy. For Queen Bee, we're going to hit the Goblin Tinkerer. What we want is the Violent Reforge, which increases melee speed, but more importantly, it increases the distance you can throw melee weapons. So now we can throw it this far. If I switch to a different one, it goes that far. And then if I go to this one and throw the other phase blade, it goes that far. Queen Bee is often an annoying boss for melee players to hit with how she flies around, but with phase blades you can swap between 2 phase blades to maximize damage, and with those Violent Reforges you can get quite a lot of reach. You probably don't need Violent for the majority of Queen Bee arenas people will make, and having a solid flat block platform on the bottom might work best for this, but unlike many other melee weapons you throw, phase blades pierce, so you can kill the bees and hit Queen Bee simultaneously. For Skeletron, I found myself only able to think of this very simple strategy where you use the High 5 with a High Pack and Stinger Necklace and Magma Stone. I don't know how unusual this is, apart from the fact that a lot of people don't use yo-yos, but it is actually a pretty safe weapon to use here, and with a good bee build, I'm able to hit him consistently, get a bunch of bees to deal some extra damage for me. It's a pretty solid setup. The Beekeeper does do more damage faster, but it's a lot harder to actually hit Skeletron with that weapon without also taking a lot of damage yourself. Finally, for the wall, there really aren't a whole lot of melee weapons that won't get you killed. There's basically the Night's Edge, Dark Lance, and the 1-for-5 edition of the Sun Fury and Blue Moon combo. And what I think is probably the safest melee build against the wall, phase blades, preferably with a Violent debuff for extra range. But we use use that against Queen Bee, so I used the Sun Fury and Blue Moon instead. And this works fine, but I found myself in a delicate dance where I had to hug the wall at all times, and if I messed up, I could end up on top of one of the eyes or the mouth and take an insane amount of damage very fast. The main benefit of this build is that I found it was even more effective than the Knight's Edge at keeping the Hungry from hitting you, and the downside is that the moment I threw the flail for extra damage, I often got swarmed and died. And before moving on to the other boss, have you checked out these really cool high-quality Terraria game mats? You should buy one by using the link in my description. This next idea I think is the coolest one I've come up with. So the newly added flint creates this cool wave effect when you fully charge it, right? Well, did you know that it travels up walls? This means for a boss like Queen Slime, you can set up a bunch of narrow pillars with doors, which will allow you to attack the boss consistently, take down her minions, and rarely have to deal with projectiles. The main issue this creates is that you have to be extra vigilant of when she teleports so she doesn't teleport onto your face.
It is best to go onto the platform so that way she'll actually teleport up there. Yeah, like that, and that way you can hit her more often.
How is this effective during second phase, I hear you ask? For that, we simply modified the setup to use large gates rather than regular doors with a chill-up mount. These work just as well against Queen Slime in first phase, and in second phase, the gates are tall enough that you can use Chilled's dash to safely squeeze past the slime when she's flying in your direction. And yes, this keeps you quite safe from her projectiles as well.
Only issue is that sometimes Chillet will stop dead in its tracks on the tall gates. I'm not sure how to prevent that from happening.
There was some finickiness where the tall gates wouldn't open when expected, and I think if a slime spawns and moves under a gate, it'll remain open rather than closing automatically, which can harm the setup slightly. But even with that occurring multiple times, it still worked very well for me. Next up is the Destroyer, where we'll skip ahead a little bit using a weapon that is post-1 mech, the Sleepy Octopod. This weapon is slept upon because it sucks. However, in my 1 year 1 world run, I found that it is an underappreciated Destroyer Shredder, and probably made the single best Destroyer Shredder for this phase of the game. These first few coils I've been showing you might not be very convincing, and the one important thing to know is that melee speed has zero effect on the Octopod's attack speed, so you should dump everything into damage with this thing while keeping enough mobility to rush the coil when it spawns. With that in mind, this is the best loadout I know of right now at this phase.
I mean, if you've already done the Old One's Army, oh my goodness, holy smokes, did that make all the difference in the world. There we go. Okay, so if you're doing the Old One's Army and farming for this, get the monk set, and then you can shred Destroyer.
If we rewind to pre-mech equipment, we're going to place a bunch of target dummies and use the Blade Tongue while maximizing our debuff damage. See, the Blade Tongue shoots an Ichor stream whenever it hits a target, including target dummies. You could go for melee speed to greatly increase the number of projectiles that the Blade Tongue is firing here, though I went for a highly defensive build as I was having a hard time making this work without being hit a lot. Roller skates came in clutch for making this idea work as well. There are two main issues with the strategy. For one, you can't change which direction the Blade Tongue attacks without stopping your attack completely and then changing direction, which is made more difficult with roller skates. I also didn't have an optimal setup with the target dummies because many of the projectiles the Blade Tongue fires are lost by hitting other dummies instead of the boss. It was a very slow battle, but it does technically work. I'd initially planned on filling the entire arena with target dummies I could use, but it turns out after placing a certain number of them, the new target dummies stopped working, period. Against the twins, we used the Sergeant United shield that I swear the Traveling Merchant never sells when you might actually use it. The weapon has far better homing than it has any right to have and pierces several times. It also has a cool parry effect to negate damage, which can be used, but apparently not while a mount is equipped, which I don't understand one bit. The issue with this weapon is that against twins in particular, it ends up hitting both of them with pretty equivalent damage, resulting in both of them being in second phase at the same time, which isn't great, but with some good parrying, you can make it work. Ultimately, this would likely be best used against Prime. For Plantera, we return to the dummy strategy, but this time with a different weapon, the Ghastly Glaive. You can attack ridiculously fast with this thing when you buff melee speed, and the Ghost of Spawns automatically target the plant and its tentacles. You get those ghosts not only by hitting enemies, but also by hitting target dummies. That said, I didn't find attack speed was any better than a menacing build. This might work better with fewer dummies, as the ghost would sometimes target the dummies rather than the boss, but this weapon did a good job at clearing the tentacles.
Is our DPS anything great? No. Is this easy? No. Is it weird? Yeah, sure.
For Golem, we have something more festive. The Christmas tree sword dropped by Everscreams can deal a fairly consistent 2500 or so damage against Golem with a solid damage build. For context, with the same build, the Terra Blade is hovering closer to 1900 DPS. Now the Terra Blade is a lot easier to use, but with the Christmas tree sword, if you maneuver yourself well and keep Golem contained in a very small area, you will do much more damage. However, the sword from the Pumpkin Moon, the Horseman's Blade, can exceed both of them, reaching an average of around 5000 DPS while using a defensive focused build. The only issue is that I wasn't able to face tank it quite well enough to not die even with potions. I'm sure people can figure out ways to make it work even better, and on lower difficulties, that would be much less of an issue. Now, do you remember the North Pole? No, not that place that Santa lives. This cool spear dropped by Ice Queens. This weapon kinda sucks, and I don't think I've ever seen anybody use it ever, but I think I've found a genuinely good use for the thing. With a build focused on melee speed, you can rain icy death upon Duke Fishron. The damage is better than the Terra Blade by a wide margin when you're able to position yourself correctly. That's the one catch of the North Pole. You need to keep Duke Fishron in a much smaller area and use very little of the arena that you built to deal the most damage. I also found it really struggled against the bubble attack somehow. However, its raining ice does actually work quite well against the third phase, where you usually should try to stay in one spot anyways. Now check out the Sky Dragon's Fury with maximized melee speed. Against Empress, I found the secondary ability of this weapon was able to hit Empress with something between 1500 to 1700 DPS fairly consistently. Not only that, but I was able to stay at a safe distance from the boss, unlike a lot of the other melee weapons. Much to my surprise, this seemed to outperform other weapons at this tier that are commonly used. Perhaps I could use different builds that would play to those weapons' advantages better, but some of these weapons see their damage potential reached when you're able to hug the boss, but that is not something that you're able to do very often with Empress. I genuinely believe the Sky Dragon's Fury, particularly with melee speed, is the best option as a melee user. Some of you older Terrarians might be wondering why I don't use the Horseman's Blade with statues or target dummies for free projectiles, as that was once a thing, but
There was a time that this was meta, but it doesn't work anymore. You have to hit a genuine enemy for it to work. Target dummies also do not work.
As for the Cultist, this is where the Flying Dragon shines the most, absolutely shredding Cultist faster than any other weapon I've tried. We didn't talk much about events, but against the Pillars, the Scourge of the Corruptor is actually still quite helpful for crowd control, and against the Stardust Pillar, I was able to literally just sit here and kill Stardust cells with the Sky Dragon's Fury, at least until other enemies showed up. For Moonlord, I'm not sure what you can really do to have fun with this boss other than setting up a unkillable melee build focused on a mix of health regen and defense. This is my loadout. There are other accessories that increase health regen, although most of them are a part of the Celestial Shell recipe, and apparently those don't stack with each other. And maybe I should use some different defensive accessories rather than the healing or the dodge. I'm sure people will say how I can better maximize this build, but it worked all the way up until the very end, where I suddenly started taking much more damage than I was before for some reason, but more damage potions to kill off Moonlord faster would probably fix that. But yeah, those are some unusual strategies I thought of to hopefully spice up your next melee playthrough and hopefully point out some of the class's potential. If you enjoyed the video, consider subscribing and check out this video where I also experimented with some of Melee's other unused weapons.